Okay, hello and welcome to today's event. I'm Jason Comfort from MS Dynamics World, and I am joined today by Mike Goldenberg, Director of Sales, and Andrew Rosa, Product Specialist from MineralTree. They have a new session today exploring the ROI of AP automation for Dynamics GP users, and we're really glad to have them here. As we get started, please know that you can add your feedback and ask questions using the Q&A block that you should see to the right side of the webcast panel here. Mike and Andrew will be leaving time at the end for questions. And without further delay, please allow me to get things started by welcoming Mike to start things off.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate the introduction and looking forward to having a good webinar today. We're going to talk about AP and payment automation for GP. And in particular, we are going to be focusing on the way to estimate the costs, how to calculate some of the savings, things like that, and really make the business case for this type of change. And as many of the people in the audience may be familiar with, AP automation, quite frankly, has typically been one of the later things that people certainly consider. But I would challenge the people here today to consider where else in your accounting process is there this much opportunity for improvement, because as I mentioned, many of the other areas people have already taken a look at. AP is often the forgotten stepchild of accounting, but certainly we hope to make a very compelling case today to give you more incentive and help you make the case within your own organization to make these improvements. Because if there is one thing that pretty much everyone will agree on, it is that AP is a very painful process today. And so certainly I believe we have an opportunity to make some real inroads there. So we'll start off just very quickly introducing ourselves here at MineralTree. I won't go into all the details, but suffice to say we've been around for a while. We've had a lot of experience actually starting within the banking channel as a solution that was private labeled through banks like Silicon Valley, City National, Square One, and a handful of many other banks. And the only reason that I really bring this up is because this is where we really proved out the product, both in terms of security. As you can imagine, working with banks is quite challenging in that respect, as well as proving out the value of the solution. Originally, we were actually focused more just on the security aspect of accounts payable and payments, but what we quickly found was that the efficiencies that come from these better processes are what really allow companies to excel and take advantage. And this is just a very, very short list of some of the 500 plus customers that we have, but we do tend to focus on companies that are what we would consider small enterprise, usually up to 250 million in revenue, sometimes up to 500, just depending. But the main thing that we look for is companies that are doing at least 100 payments or invoices a month. That's when it starts to become a real bear, the process itself. And so we'll go into more detail in terms of how we address all these things. But again, just wanted to give everyone a quick intro to us and kind of where we come from and also where we're headed. So one of the biggest areas of challenge people have is just around the waste, fraud, and abuse that comes from check writing. And what's interesting is, we throw out the statistic of 50% of companies are still using paper checks, or 50% of payments are still by check, but it's actually significantly higher as you go down to the smaller and mid-market companies. So when you start to talk about SMB businesses, a lot of them are still doing 80, 90% check payments. And as you can imagine, this is both costly as well as there's all sorts of risks. And certainly the people in the webinar today have probably heard many of the stories that have come up through check fraud and people washing checks and all the different things that you can do. And one thing that I would certainly point out is that this is a huge opportunity for both large enterprises as well as smaller companies, although I will say that, when you start to look at the larger enterprises, most of them have already taken advantage of this. What MineralTree is allowing is for smaller enterprises who haven't necessarily wanted to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to improve this process to have a solution that's affordable, secure, and easy to use and set up. And so, again, we'll continue to go through that throughout the webinar. And when you think about your own accounts payable process, oftentimes when we're asking people to quantify what it costs them today so they can then determine what the potential savings are moving forward, it is incredibly difficult to quantify these things because it's very hard to pinpoint what each of these little things that I've mentioned here are costing you, and oftentimes people are doing other roles and other responsibilities as well, and so it's really tough to nail down what the actual cost in terms of time is as well as money, but again, we're going to go through that to help you guys out and make that case. So the other thing, and certainly we're not looking to fear-monger here or create any sort of alarm with people, but online fraud, internal fraud, external fraud, these are all very real things, and certainly it's your fiduciary responsibility within the accounting department to ensure that you are protecting the business in a very real way, and you can point back to all the things that you're doing to ensure that. And one of the best and easiest ways to do it, quite frankly, is just to move away from all the paper and into more digital electronic forms, because if nothing else at all, they allow you to track things better and can be a good preventative measure. Also, one of the things that very few people are aware of is a thing called Regulation E. Now, Regulation E is what protects you and I as consumers against online bank fraud. And so if someone was to take over my account and steal my money, typically my bank, through Regulation E, would protect me. What most people are not aware of, and certainly I implore you to double check with your bank, but as a business bank account, you are not protected under Regulation E. And so if there are issues in terms of any sort of online fraud, and you hear them in the paper every day now, those are very real things that you are not necessarily going to be protected against through your bank as much as you would hope you would be. And one of the nice things that we do offer is, because our product is so secure, is we actually provide a $100,000 guarantee against fraud. And so again, just helping you sleep at night, giving you that reassurance that you're doing everything in your power to protect the business against these issues. So when you think about your invoice to pay process, and that's really what MineralTree focuses in on, is the invoice to pay process. From the time the invoice is received from you all the way through the payment execution and ensuring that information is properly synced back to your GP instance, that is really where we focus on. And when you think of what that process looks like today, it is often a very manual. You're doing data entry into the system, which is certainly keeping someone busy, but oftentimes there's a lot better things for you to do at that time. Also, in terms of the approvals, those can be challenging, tracking through emails and Excel sheets, and God forbid someone who's tracking these things leaves the company. Now you're going back trying to figure out the trail of what was going on. From a compliance and auditing perspective, it can give you quite a bit of agita in terms of trying to feel confident that you've got a consistent process for tracking all those approvals, and you're not going back with the auditor looking through emails trying to find the email where the person said they approved the invoice. In terms of payment approvals, it can certainly be challenging, especially if you've got any sort of multiple locations, or if you've got check signers in different locations, or who travel regularly, as well as just making sure that all those controls, which are manually being done right now, are actually being followed. Can be quite challenging. And then, of course, the payment execution. Many people are still handling these things manually, or sending a complex file to the bank and doing this in a very manual fashion. And so what we do is, and you see the cost here, and this is actually a very conservative cost. Most third-party research, as well as what we see through our 500 customers, or 500-plus customers, is that it's, believe it or not, somewhere between $15 to $25 typically per invoice to process. So it's extremely costly, and a lot of that is the cost of time alone. But what we do is bring it all under one umbrella in one neat package from start to finish, from the moment you capture the invoice through the payment execution itself, whether it be check, ACH, or the virtual card option, which we offer, where you can actually earn rebates back on the payments that you're making, and syncing all that data back to your GP instance as one consistent process, and also leaving GP as your system of record. And because there's a bi-directional sync going on between the two systems, and it's actually an API level integration, not files being transferred, excuse me, this means that your records are going to maintain consistency, and again, GP will remain your system of record. So let's dive into the cost, because again, how do you know what you are saving if you don't know what it's costing you today? And also, how do you know if it's even worth doing something about if you don't know what it's costing you today? And so these are some obviously very simple formulas, and certainly the people on the line here today are much more proficient at calculating these things, but we've spent quite a bit of time, and everything that I'm showing you today, we can provide much more detail calculators for you to use to make it your own and use all your own numbers, but this is just a very good starting point for you. So really, we're just trying to figure out what is the cost per invoice, the cost per payment, which ultimately will bring us back to the total cost per invoice. And so I apologize, I know this is a little bit small, but ultimately, when we're thinking about the cost to process an invoice, again, there's a lot of little things that go in there. And so certainly there's some hard costs involved in terms of storing the documents and paying, the money lost from paying too early, or the money lost from duplicate payments, things like that. That's really not the larger portion of it, although it certainly does add up. But a lot of it really is in that time spent. And so one of the ways we've gone about calculating this cost, which we find to be quite helpful, is it's really tough to figure out what is one invoice costing you in terms of time. But when you start to do, let's say, 100 at a time, and then figure out what doing those 100 costs, because sometimes you'll have a couple that are very quick and easy, and sometimes you'll have a bunch that are very long and have 150 line items. Obviously, it varies by industry and things like that. But when you get to 100 of them, it gives you a much better idea of the average of what it's going to cost you. But when you think about all these little things that add up in terms of the sorting and the filing and things like that, that's where MineralTree and an AP automation solution will really help, is getting away from all that paper, being able to, essentially scan in invoices and either throw them in a folder where you don't have to necessarily sort them all and you just know they're there, or candidly, many of our clients actually get rid of the documents altogether, because as a part of our solution, we actually provide unlimited document storage. And so when you think about the time it takes to do all these things, when you think about the cost of your AP staff, the cost of the department managers and department heads who may be approving these invoices, and certainly the final approvers, that's where we start to get to these really significant costs. And at the end of the day, the slide I showed earlier showed it's about $15, $10 to $15. This averages out to about 12. But again, we can provide you this calculator at the end for those that are interested, in order to run your own numbers through here, so you can get a better sense of what it's costing you. The next is the current cost of your manual check printing and mailing. So for those that are still doing a lot of checks, you already know the costs, just in terms of, and it's funny, oftentimes people will tell us they only really are factoring in the check stock and maybe the stamp, but there is a lot of little things that go into it. And so just in terms of your hard costs alone, right around $1.29 is very reasonable. But then again, here comes the time aspect, right, of having someone sitting there and printing the checks and making sure the correct document is attached to them, and creating positive pay files and reviewing backup and stuffing the envelopes and all those little things that, it doesn't feel like they're costing a lot of time and energy, but at the end of the week, they do add up to quite a bit. And then, of course, having the CEO, CFO, controller, whoever it may be, approving these documents and going through the paperwork. That's if they're even there and able to get to it, versus, again, being at multiple locations or being on the road. Those things do really add up. And so, again, oftentimes people are thinking just the hard cost of the check. But when you start to look at the time spent and things like that, you go from a buck and change to closer to $5, and it does add up quickly, and those are real dollars, and that is real time that can be spent on other things. So this is how you save. You save by, and I was speaking with someone yesterday, and they were saying, I understand, Mike, automation is very important, but we really feel like we need to improve our process first. We think that's really where we're losing money, and I totally agree. There's absolutely a balance of improving process as well as a system, but what I would argue is this: it is very hard to make tangible gains while just having the same systems in place. What you need is a tool that will allow you to really save time and really evolve your process. And so when you think about a solution like MineralTree and automating the invoice-to-pay process from start to finish, imagine an invoice comes into the email address which we've set up for you. We automatically capture both the header and line level information. It is automatically being sent for approvals, and there's some coding that's being done to ensure that the invoice is approved correctly. We're continuing to send reminders to the approvers. Once the payment or the invoice is approved, we are then sending it to the different levels of payment authorization that's needed. So if it's over a certain amount, you may need a second signature, you may need a dual signature on the payment. We're taking care of all of that. Then we're actually executing that payment for you, whether it be check, ACH, or the virtual card where you earn rebates, and sending out remittance for you at the same time, which is a huge thing, especially if you are doing ACH. Because oftentimes when people are getting an ACH payment, they don't even know what they're getting paid for. It's just a dollar amount that shows up in their account. And so this saves you a tremendous amount of time in terms of people wondering, where is the payment? What did I get paid for? Those calls begin to cease. And then again, we're executing those payments and pushing all that payment detail back into GP. And then you have the ability, it works with GP's batch system. So you come in and you have the ability then to just approve your batches before they finally go into the system. So then the question becomes, we understand the cost. How do we then go about estimating the savings we're going to get from this thing? And there's really 4 distinct ways in which you're going to save using a solution like this. Some of them are in terms of time. Some of them are more true hard costs. So when you think about the invoice automation part, the front end piece of it, that's really going to be a lot of time savings. And so the biggest question I often ask people, and is, what is it that you're going to do if, let's say that we are true to our word, which we are in terms of saving 50 to 60% of the time that you're spending on accounts payable? What are you going to do with that person's free time? And oftentimes people will joke and say, oh, trust me, we'll find something for them. Don't worry about that. But it's a very real question because everyone wants to be more efficient, but oftentimes people don't think, well, what am I going to do with that time? What I would say is there's a tremendous opportunity to improve vendor relationships, to do more analytics within the accounting team. In many cases, what we find is that by freeing up time for an accounts payable person who may not be the absolute most technically proficient person on the staff, you can actually move some other work to them and then free up the controller's time, the CFO's time more. But either way, like I said, these are real savings in terms of time and dollars. So you have that aspect. Also, by being more consistent and being able to process invoices in a much more specific time window, it does give you the opportunity to better negotiate vendor discounts. If you go to a vendor and just ask for a discount, certainly good luck, and you know how that typically goes. Whereas if you actually have something to offer in terms of being able to pay earlier, now you've got a real point of leverage. I know this varies by vendor. I know it varies by industry. But what I would say is you would be surprised how much of an impact this can have. We have many customers who have justified the purchase just on early payment discounts alone that they're going to be able to leverage using a system like this with the confidence that they can actually make those payments that quickly. The next piece is the payment automation. In terms of hard costs, that's a simple dollars and cents. Our economies of scale are certainly better than most companies, so we can send those checks and electronic payments much more cost efficiently. And then, of course, as I've mentioned a couple times, rebates from the virtual card payments. The virtual card, some people are familiar, some people are not. It's sometimes called a ghost card, but ultimately what it is, it's a one-time use card with a certain dollar amount for a certain vendor for a specific time frame. It's actually not your card, so you don't have to get the credit for this card, but it's essentially a card provided through us that is sent to your vendors. And this is essentially running on a MasterCard card rail. And so really anyone who accepts MasterCard is someone who can accept this form of payment. But of course it does take getting those vendors set up. The nice thing is we have over 250,000 vendors that are already a part of this network. And so oftentimes, and this is obviously an average, but about 10% of your total spend can be moved to this form of payment, where you're earning rebates, typically about 0.5% on each one. And so, again, these can be very real. This can be a very large amount of money. The other thing is, for those that are looking for a more specific understanding of what their rebate benefits will be, we can actually run your vendor list from the last 12 months against the current acceptors of this payment form, and we can give you a very precise estimate of what it will be moving forward, or really specifically what it would have been had you had the card or have been using this payment method over the last 12 months. But that should give you a very good view into what it will be moving forward. So let's take a run through. Obviously, we didn't put the actual company name here just to protect the privacy, but these are actually numbers from one of our current customers. So they do about 250 payments and invoices a year. It varies, obviously, by company. We actually usually see more of a 2-to-1 invoice-to-payment ratio. This particular company is pretty much 1-to-1. They were using about 80% check payments, and the average payment was about $1,500, so about $4.5 million in total annual spend. And what you can see, the $21,250,000 in savings, that is a net savings. I'm actually calculating in the cost of the MineralTree solution for this actual example. And so now we'll dig into the details of how we get to these numbers a little bit more. So when you look at automating the opportunity cost of invoice processing, you're doing 3,000 invoices. We're estimating that it's currently costing you about $10 per invoice, although based on the numbers we looked at earlier, it's probably closer to 12 to 15. But again, you can put your own numbers in here if you'd like. And then ultimately, what we're doing is saving you 60% of the time, bringing it down to about $4 instead of 10. And then we're factoring in, and this is very much so an estimate, but the MineralTree cost of about $3.50. And so what it works out to is you're saving about $2.50 on every invoice that you process. And so that's where you get to about $7,500. Now, in terms of early pay discounts, again, this can vary quite a bit by company industry. Very candidly, this will take a little bit of work, but this is why you free up time, so that you can do things like this. But even if you look at just this very, very small percentage of the overall spend, being able to get a small discount percentage on, that's where you're able to see, again, a pretty significant savings. And really all it takes is a couple vendors and a couple of significant spends to really, move that needle. Next is in terms of, again, just the payment automation piece, that side of the house, the check printing and mailing costs for you. So again, we're factoring about $4 per check. And in this scenario, this company was doing a lot of checks, so obviously there was even more savings than if they had been doing mostly just ACH. But again, we are factoring in the cost of a check or ACH through MineralTree, although again, this will vary slightly based on volumes and contract lengths and things like that. but you're looking at, approximately another $6,000 in savings from this alone. And then lastly is the rebates piece. So what we do see is about 10%. We've seen as high as 15 to 20% on this, and then you're getting your 0.5% rebate. So it's not necessarily a huge amount, but this is what brings down kind of the overall cost of your solution and just helps justify the cost of this process that much more. And so again, just kind of rounding it all out here when you come back to it, even a company doing 250 payments and invoices a month, which, obviously it varies. I would say this is kind of call it a median type of customer for us, although we have a lot of customers processing thousands a month, and we have some processing as few as 100 or even less sometimes if they're fast growing. But again, real significant savings here that you can't really get in other parts of accounting, not to mention just all these other things that come from automating a process by going digital, by getting rid of paper, that you just create a better, more consistent process that gives you better visibility, better tracking, better auditing, and compliance abilities. It's more doing data entry and manually following up on AP, like I was saying earlier, is just a huge pain in the you-know-what for everyone involved. And rarely do we hear anyone that loves this type of process. So being able to take a lot of that really menial work away and give people better things to work on is not only good for the business, but is good for the morale of the staff as a whole. And it's really just something where, if nothing else, the people that make this change are extremely happy, and certainly we see incredibly high retention rates. And once people come on the solution, it's something you really can't imagine going back. And so we're almost at the actual demo. I'll wrap it up quickly here, but you're going to save money, you're going to have better visibility and control, and you're going to provide better security to your company. And that's what it's all about. It's not just about the savings. It's not just about the visibility. It's not just about the security. But when you put those three things together, it's something where it's really hard to say no. And what we do at MineralTree to help you with that is we make it easy to use, easy to set up. You're going to see in the demo in a couple seconds. It's very, I know everyone says that they have an intuitive interface, but I think you'll see it's very clean and easy to use. And the setup process is very quick and easy. Typically, we're able to sync and integrate with your system in a half hour to an hour. And then from there, it's just more so than anything, it's just setup. It's making sure we have all the right rules in place for the approvals and things like that, and confirming everything with your bank. People often ask, how long does it take to get set up? And my answer is, it depends on you typically, because, from our end, we can get it set up really in a matter of a week or two. It's really just a matter of getting everything together for us. And we are very, very strong believers in the importance of both getting off to a good start and the implementation process being a huge focus for us to make sure that you're set off in the right direction from the beginning. And also, we do have a very strong customer success program to ensure continued success with the product. And our support is top-notch. Certainly, I'd put it up against any of our competitors and then some. And also, we understand that everyone's got their own process, and while we can help with things like best practices and how to continue to get even better with your process even after you've brought MineralTree into the mix, we can be very flexible with your different setups. And every AEP, every accounting department is different, so we can be very flexible to make sure that we're not breaking any of your controls or anything like that. And so before we head into the show itself, why say goodbye to AP or antiquated AP? So you can focus on better things, so you've got that better control. and to protect your organization. So with no further ado, thank you very much for your time, and I will push it over to Andrew Rosa, who's now going to just show you guys a quick demo of the product, and then we can really dive into any questions that people may have.
All right, thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. You should be able to see the MineralTree login screen now. Hi, my name is Andrew Rosa. I'm a product specialist here at MineralTree. I'm going to take you through a demo of the product. We have a GP demo set up for you today with some mock-up data. So we'll walk through how the product looks and go through the different tabs, and then talk about an example case of a bill that needs to be paid. So for that example, we'll go through the 4 main phases of the invoice to payment process as we see them. The first would be invoice capture, that's getting the document and getting the information off of it, and then moving to invoice approval. Once that document is ingested in our system, it can be sent around for approval to perhaps a department head or a different manager, something like that. And then when the bill's ready to be paid, we'll move to the payment approval step. And then finally, at the end, we'll talk a little bit about payment execution. So if you keep those 4 steps in mind as we go through, I think that will kind of anchor you with what you're seeing. So just keep any questions in mind that you have as we go along, and we can answer them at the end. Before we actually log in, one point to clarify is that our application is divided into 2 main user roles. The first one we call the accounting manager. And that's just the AP person at the business who handles all of the bills, routes them for approval, and then gets those bills ready for payment. And when they're ready for payment, they're sending for payment approval to our other main user type, which we call the payment approver. So that's typically the check signer at the business. Depending on the size of the business, it might just be the owner of the business, or as things get bigger, it could be a sequence of the controller and then perhaps the CFO after that, depending on how big the payment is. But that user logs into their own interface, looks at a list of payments, and then approves and releases. So we'll see that at the end. Let's start with the accounting manager first. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And you'll notice right from the outset that I'm presented a list of companies to choose from. So if your business has more than one entity within GP that you're working with, we can sync them separately to MineralTree and have those bills managed separately. So I'm going to find our entity for today and go ahead and log in. So we start with the dashboard. This is what the AP person sees when they log into MineralTree every day. It's the front page of our interface, and it shows a few pieces of important information that they'll need to do their work here. The points of interest are, first of all, in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice this connected to GP icon. So this indicates that we have an active sync with the business's GP account. So the initial sync takes place during the customer setup. It's really a quick and easy process. We work directly with usually it's the GP consultant or some IT contact that manages the GP server, and we have a short 1-hour phone call where we get on, we install our connector service, and then we watch the data sync over. So during that initial sync, we bring over all the vital information from GP, so all the account information, all the different fields for coding, and then, of course, your full list of vendors, all the open bills, and the history of payments for the last 2 years. And once that initial sync is complete, we establish an active connection with the account. So now, any changes that are made in GP are constantly flowing over to MineralTree in real time. So the service just runs on the GP server and grabs anything that's been adjusted. So it could be perhaps a vendor address was changed in GP, or information on a bill was changed, or even that a bill was marked as paid. All those actions will just sync over to our interface in real time. And it's a two-way sync, so changes can be made here, and they'll sync back to GP as well. Other points of interest on this screen. you'll see the AP person can see the cash totals up here, so they can review their general ledger cash right from GP. And then we have the bank cash total to compare side by side. We actually are able to connect to the customer's bank and get a real-time feed of their bank account information. So all they have to do is click refresh to see the latest balance, and they can refer to that next to their GL cash. We have a simple invoice aging diagram here in the middle. They can hover over these bars to see the different totals for each aging period of their unpaid bills. But if they can drill down to see a specific group in an aging period here. But if they want to look at their full list of unpaid invoices, they're just going to go to the Invoices tab at the top. So this is the screen that the accounting manager user will spend most of their time in our interface. Just to situate you with this bills list, from left to right we have the vendor name, the amount remaining on the bill, the due date, any documents associated with it, which we'll get to in a moment, the status of invoice approval requests for those documents, and then finally we have the invoice number here at the end. So these are all the unpaid invoices for the business today. There are a couple different ways that these invoices can get into our system, depending on the business's needs and what settings they signed up for at MineralTree. So first of all, because we have that active sync with the customer's GP account, they could simply enter these bills in GP, as they always do for their existing AP process, and they will sync over to this list automatically and be ready to pay right away. They might want to take advantage of our document storage capabilities and attach a document to the bill that's synced over, so it can be stored here and also routed for approval. But we can go a step further and actually allow the business to start with that document, whether it's a PDF or a Word document or an image file, anything really, and they can upload it or email it in, and we can actually capture the information on the document and generate the unpaid invoice for them on this list. So entry moves over to the MineralTree bills list, and everything is based on the documents that have been sent in for capture. So I'll give you an example. If I pull up this N-Star invoice here, you can see the document on the left, which was emailed in, and on the right, all the information that we've pulled out after the invoice has gone through our capture process. So when it arrives in our inbox, it's sent out for capture immediately, and the capture process returns the fully extracted document and unpaid invoice 24 hours later. So the next morning when the AP manager comes in and takes a look at what's been captured, they'll see the document here, and then all the information, things like vendor name, invoice number, dates, and amounts will be captured for them automatically. So they can already start saving time on having to enter all of this stuff in manually. It can simply be sent in, and we'll take care of the invoice entry process for you. And businesses handle this in different ways. Some of them are uploading the document one at a time. Some of them have their vendors send right to the email address that we set up for them, which is unique per company. And still others have a forwarding rule set up from their existing payables email address. So they'll simply have all documents that get sent to that, forwarded into the MineralTree inbox, and they'll arrive here and be captured and ready for the next morning. So after the capture process takes place, the accounting manager can come in here and do their review. And like I said before, now all of the invoice entry is centered in MineralTree first instead of in GP. And the advantage here is not only that the document is stored with the bill itself, but that all the entry and approval routing can take place before the posting action actually occurs on the GP list. So as GP users, I'm sure you're all aware that after you post, it's very tough to get anything edited on a bill in GP. So with this system, you can perform all the actions that you need before you actually move forward with posting. So the AP manager would simply come in here and do their review. They might add some additional codes, although a few of these we can do by default, by vendor, so they could have already had these filled out. But they'll simply go in here and do any entry necessary and verify that all the information looks correct, especially for each individual line item. And when they're ready to post, all they have to do is click Post here at the bottom and then Save at the top. So that will push this bill over to the GP bills list. It comes into GP as a batch and appears on the payables batch screen, and all you have to do is post that batch, and the unpaid invoice will show up posted on your GP bills list. Before we post, we might want to send this document around for approval, and there are a couple different ways we can do that. We make it very easy. If I go over to the Approvals tab, you'll see this has already been sent out for one approval. We have a simple color code that indicates the status. Yellow is awaiting, green is good to go, red would indicate a rejection. So we can send out a one-at-a-time approval per document simply by going down here and typing in the email address of the person to whom we'd like to send the approval request. You can add these invoice approvers on the fly. These are meant to be sort of sub-users in the system that review invoices quickly from an email and give their okay, and then let us move forward with payment. So it might be, if you have a distributed business, it could be a location manager at a specific location, or perhaps it's a department head who needs to okay an expense that falls under a specific department. It's easy enough to add them. Simply put in their name and email, and once their name is saved, it will be remembered moving forward, and simply hit Save at the top to send them a request. So they'll receive an email with a link to view the document. They can approve or reject right from the email. They can add comments. And everything that they do will be reflected here where the accounting manager user can see their list of bills. So like I mentioned before, that color code indicates the status. You can see we already have a few that have been approved. We even have one that's been rejected. So we would simply click in here and look to see what the notes were to review further. But it all takes place, in the background. It gets sent out in an email, and everything is reflected here for our review after the fact. I should mention before we move to payments that we have the ability to auto-route invoices by specific rules. So we can auto-route by vendor and also by different fields in GP, namely department, location, and class. So anytime that we see those fields come up for a new invoice, the contacts that the company lists can automatically receive invoice approval requests and get those emails out right away. So it may be that by the time these the AP manager comes in to review these bills, that they've already been sent out for approval automatically after they've been captured, and that they're ready to go right away. They have a bunch of green statuses here and are ready to move forward with payment. So let's talk a little bit about submitting for payment approval, and then we'll move to payment execution. So when it's time to pay bills, the accounting manager, they might filter this list a little bit. We can use our advanced search option to make it much more manageable. If you have a very large list, you'll likely just want to see everything that's just been approved. So I'll go ahead and just filter that now. So you can see now we have a bunch of green icons to work with. And we start the payment approval process just by hitting Pay here on the right. And you'll see now these payments start to stack up in our selected payments queue on the far right side of the screen. So you can think of this as the shopping cart for payments. These are what we're getting ready to send along for payment approval. So I'll simply click Pay on a few of these. You'll see them stack up in the queue. If there is more than one invoice for the same vendor, we can combine them into a single payment. So it will show as one payment total, but with several invoices underneath. From the queue, the accounting manager can click here where it says Not Set and choose a future date for the payment. If they leave it as not set, it will simply be issued upon approval. So if it's approved tonight, that check will be in the mail first thing tomorrow morning. But they might want it approved tonight and sent out instead at the end of the week. Maybe they want it in the mail on Friday. They can click the date here, and it will automatically go out at that time. They can make partial payments by adjusting the amount here. But when they're ready to send along to their payment approver, they just hit confirm at the bottom. They get a last look at everything they're submitting. They can see the bank account it's coming out of, the type of payment being made here. They can make any notes for their payment approver to review. But when they hit submit here, that sends an email to their payment approver, letting them know they have payments awaiting their approval and inviting them to log in. So at this point, I'll go ahead and log out of the accounting manager, and we'll assume now that I'm the check signer at the business, and we'll see what they see. You'll notice when I log in, again, I choose my company, but then at this point in the process, I'm sent a 6-digit code to my cell phone number. So this is an additional security feature that we offer that allows an extra layer of protection to be used on the account. We can have these codes sent out via text or voice message to a phone number that's indicated for each user during the customer setup. And they can be sent out when the users log in and also when payments are actually released. So I have this here to ensure that I am indeed the correct person who has authority to release these payments. It's important to get the code right. There we go. So as the payment approver, I have a similar dashboard to what the accounting manager could see. I've got those cash totals again I can review. And then I just have a list of payments here at the bottom in the diagram in the middle. So I can see payments awaiting my approval, which have been sent to me by the accounting manager. Payments that I've put on hold previously, which just put them aside for later. And then payments that have already been scheduled for the day. So all they have to do to review what their accounting manager has sent to them is click View My Payments here under Awaiting Approval, and they're brought to the list of payments that are pending to go out. So you can see that we tried to make this screen very stripped down and easy. We understand that a CFO, they just want to get in here quickly and get their work done and move on with their day. If it's, for example, a fixed cost that they're looking at, perhaps they pay Keyspan $200 every month, and they already know what the bill is, they already recognize it, they don't need to review it any further. They can come in here very quickly and just hit approve and proceed to confirmation, and all their work is done. They can even use this approve all button to get everything out at once to save time. But if they do want to review in further detail, all they have to do is click on the vendor name here, and they're brought to a more in-depth screen that shows them a lot more information about the specific payment and then information about the vendor as well. So they can see on this screen, for example, recent payments made to the vendor. They can see the type of payment that's being made here, whether it's check or ACH or maybe virtual card. They can see the bank account it's coming out of, which of course would be important to someone in charge of releasing payments. All the notes that have been added along the way, a history log of different actions taken. And then all the way at the bottom here, they can see all the individual invoices included on the payment, and they can review the documents attached by clicking in here. So they can see the original invoice and review the actual hard copy. And finally, all the notes added by the invoice approver. They can see who approved it. And then they can see the specific line item coding as well if it appears in GP. So from this screen, they can approve, and it will simply move down the list for them automatically. As we mentioned before, they could put it on hold if they want to save it for later. They can also reject it if they see a mistake, or maybe they don't want to pay it today. They click reject here. They have a few canned messages they can send, or they can write their own. Maybe they want to pay this one next month. When they hit submit, that sends an email back to their accounting manager asking them to review and resubmit based on the feedback they're giving them. But otherwise, if they're happy with this list, they're just going to click Approve to move through it. And when they're done, they hit Proceed to Confirmation. They get a last look at their GL cash to see how the totals will be affected by the payments that they're submitting. And when they're ready, they hit Submit, and all their work is done. So this really simple process replaces what businesses are doing today, printing out the checks, bringing them into the check signer's office, getting them reviewed one at a time with the paper documents paper clipped to them. Instead, they're just going online and hitting Submit, and after that, we take care of the rest for them. So these payments are scheduled to go out. At the end of the day, we gather up everything that's been scheduled, and we process some files necessary to get them out the door. So for check payments, we'll send a file along to our check processing partner, who's Harlan Clark. They're one of the largest check vendors in the country. And Harlan Clark will print these checks and put them in the mail on behalf of the business first thing the next morning. So these are checks with the business's address on them. They've got their routing and bank account number as well. We can get a scan of the check signer's signature and print it on the check. So it looks like a check that the business has cut themselves and put in the mail. And the point about bank accounts is important. It comes right from the account. There's no kind of settlement account in between. And it's only going to be, the funds will only be moved out of the account once the vendor actually deposits the check. For other types of payments, the process is similar. An ACH file is processed the same evening and sent along through the customer's bank, and should reach the vendor's account within 1 to 2 days. Virtual card is the same. The card is issued that same evening and sent along to the vendor. We can send out remittance emails at that time as well to any contacts listed at the vendor. And then finally, and most importantly for the purposes of AP, all this payment information at that end of day time when we send all the payments out will be synced back to Great Plains. So the payments again come in the form of a payables batch and simply have to be posted, and that closes out the bills. So the loop is closed. There's no need for the strenuous manual work that's normally required to keep everything in balance, and that finishes out the payment process. So that's everything for us, invoice to payment. I'm going to pass the presenter role back to Mike, and we can open for questions.
So, Andrew, it looks like we already have a bunch of questions coming in, but certainly please keep them coming. We'll try and get as many as we can in the session here. So, going through the list, and I'll try and consolidate some of these because there is a bit of overlap. So there's questions about OCR, and this is actually a real area, a real point of distinction for us. So we don't just, for those who are familiar with OCR, you know that it's not that great. It's maybe 80–90% accurate, which means you're spending your time trying to find the 10 to 20% of errors. And so oftentimes you're losing a lot of the benefit there. What we leverage is actually a combination of technology as well as human intervention. When I say human intervention, I mean on our side, not on yours, in order to deliver that data captured at a 99.5% accuracy rate. So there's a lot less work on your end. We don't have to train the system. We don't have to load all sorts of templates in. Again, for those who have had previous experience with this type of technology, it's out of the box, ready to go, day one. In many cases, we can even capture handwritten information as well. So it's a really efficient way to do it, and will certainly take out all the key punching that you guys are typically doing today. Another question is just in terms of do you need a separate chart of accounts and vendor records and things like that? The answer is absolutely not. There's no dual entry. We're pulling over all of your vendor information, all your chart of accounts, everything through the integration into MineralTree. So there's no additional work on your end to add those things. And if you ever do add additional charts of accounts, coding of any sort, that's all coming into MineralTree automatically for you. So here's a good question, and I get where it's coming from. How would you go on? How would you go on estimating the related costs in more detail, as this is obviously the hardest part on estimating the potential return? And so I think the answer here is, the first thing is, obviously we can't, we don't have something that follows you around and monitors the exact cost of all these things. I think the key is to just make sure that you have a comprehensive list of what those things are so you can start to quantify those things. And so in the presentation earlier, you should have seen, the more detailed information in terms of how we were estimating those costs. But again, for those that are interested, we can provide you this calculator where you can adjust your own numbers. And listen, it's never going to be completely perfect, but it should give you a sense. The combination of that, as well as also, again, all the information we've provided today, this is not us in a bubble coming up with these things. Oftentimes we're using 3 to 5 different resources of third-party research that goes beyond just what MineralTree thinks. But also we do as well factor in what our own customers have told us in terms of the current costs. Let's see. So the other thing is we don't do accounts receivable, but what we do is so there's obviously the processing of invoices, and that's certainly a huge part of what we do in terms of AP automation. That being said, we actually do have quite a few clients that are really focused just on the payment disbursements. And so we have companies like Rover.com, who is, for those who have dogs, they're essentially the Uber of dog walker services. They have really a disbursement model. We have another company, Just Give, again, where they're really just dispersing large volumes of payments, and they're not necessarily paying invoices. And so we can certainly help with those cases as well. So another question, and this is a really good one, and I'm glad it was asked. Someone said, we only process about 200 invoices max per month. It's a software geared towards a higher volume. The answer is really, what we say is the Mendoza line, if you will, is about 100 invoices a month. But the product is able to scale to thousands, of course. But really you start to see value at 100 or more. That being said, we actually have a lot of clients who do less than 100, but they're quickly growing, and they see a lot of value in a solution like this in terms of instead of having to have someone manually doing it. So people who are strapped for resources, even if they're doing less than 100, will see a lot of value out of this. But 200 is absolutely right in the sweet spot. Another question I'm glad someone asked, on invoices that need to be processed the same day, input, invoice, and issue payment on the same time, how is this handled with MineralTree? So we actually do have a way to handle this. So for instance, because of the nature of both technology as well as human intervention on the capture side, anything that comes into it's not actually immediate because of that human intervention piece. And so anything that comes into the system before 8 p.m. Eastern Standard, you will have back in the system by 8 a.m. the next day. However, if you have an invoice that needs to be entered and paid immediately, you can just, it gives you the option to cancel the capture piece, and you can enter it yourself if need be. And then if you have someone standing in front of you and you need to hand them a check, instead of, you would just, there's a payment option that just says manual check, and then you can just cut the check. And so you're still following all the same processes, but you do have that ability to do things immediately if need be. Okay, so a couple of questions, same idea. You know what's amazing is I was actually talking to a client the other day, and we were joking, they justified the cost of this product alone. And I'm saying this because someone asked a question about FedExing things, but they justified buying this product alone just based on the savings from not having to FedEx around checks for signature, because they had a lot of different locations, a lot of different people, a lot of dual signatures. And, because in order to get things out, they would literally have to FedEx the checks around for signature, and, it became incredibly costly. So certainly an area, that you can save quite a bit. But again, anything that needs to be paid right away can be done. Let's see. There's a question about, can one simultaneously do both enter invoices in GP and email invoices directly into MineralTree and they sync up? So you do have the ability to, because of the bidirectional sync, you do have the ability to enter an invoice into GP, and then it will automatically pull into MineralTree, where you can then attach that document that was sent in via email into the system. So yes, that's absolutely a possibility. And we are running short on time, and I know there's a lot more questions. My contact information should be showing for everyone, so certainly, we're happy to answer a lot of these questions and would love to continue the conversation. I'll just answer two last questions here quickly. Does it matter if our GP is hosted with a third party and not on our own server? Absolutely not. We work with a lot of the most premier and really any GP consultant out there, even if they're hosting it, so it makes no difference to us. We'll work directly with them. Do you interface to the bank's positive pay? It's a very good question, and you should be asking it. Positive pay is a tremendous security measure. So we can help provide you with the file. It depends on the bank. Sometimes we can send them a direct file transmission, but there's a lot of intricacies that come with that, just in terms of the bank may try and charge you, whatever it may be. At the absolute very least, though, we can help provide you the file for you to just upload to your bank portal. But a very good question. So unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you all so much for coming, and look forward to continuing the conversation. And again, if anyone's interested in a more detailed calculator for their costs, we're happy to provide that to everyone as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And with that, we will wrap up today's event. If you do have any remaining questions, feel free to enter them. We'll make sure that the MineralTree team do see those. Of course, emailing Michael himself directly works too. With that, we are going to conclude today's event. Have a great day, everyone.